Have you guys ever wondered if you're making the best possible arrow purchase for your bow hunting setup? Today we're going to talk about the top 5 mistakes we see archers make consistently when purchasing arrow shafts. But the first mistake that we see bow hunters making when purchasing arrow shafts is not truly understanding what the spine of the arrow is or the proper spine to shoot. When you look at an arrow shaft, you're going to see a 3-digit number on the shaft. This in my hand is an Exodus MMT 300. So this is a 300 spined arrow shaft. You'll have 350s, 330s, 340s, 400s, 450s. That 3-digit number is the spine of your shaft. That is the static spine of the shaft, and that's what you're going to base your purchase off of. That number is not how much the arrow weighs, and that number does not relate to the dynamic spine of the arrow, which is how you actually build that arrow to fly the best. But the first thing you need to understand when purchasing an arrow is what arrow spine is going to work best for you. If you are in between spines, a lot of guys will tell you that it's better to be overspined than underspined, so keep that in mind. The smaller the number, the stiffer the spine. So for example, a 300 spine is going to be stiffer than a 400 spine shaft. If you're shooting heavyweight, long draw, you're going to need a stiffer arrow. If you're shooting light draw, short draw length, you're going to need a less stiff arrow. The more weight up front, the more you're going to weaken the spine, the stiffer the arrow you're going to need. So the number one thing you need to understand when purchasing arrow shafts is the static spine. The second most common mistake we see people make is thinking that a straighter arrow is going to be better. Listen, we've done a lot of content on straightness, and it might not be what you think it is. So straightness measurements, there is no standard throughout the industry. So you can have a manufacturer tell you that you have a 0.001 straightness arrow because of the way they measured the straightness of the arrow, and another manufacturer could measure that same arrow shaft with a different way of measuring it and come up with 0.003 or 0.006. When a manufacturer builds an arrow, they are using the same raw materials, the same mandrels, the same process to come up with an arrow shaft. And then they just batch those shafts based on a straightness tolerance. When it comes to straightness and thinking you need the absolute straightest arrow possible, you're being charged a lot more money for a straighter arrow that downrange, the typical guy, Lucas, Chad, anyone in the office is not going to be able to tell the difference between a 0.001 straightness, 0.003 straightness, 0.006 straightness. If you are the elite, the 1% of the world, yes, you might be able to see a little bit of a difference. But for a bow hunter, when it comes to hunting, shooting an animal, a whitetail, especially within 30 yards, save some money and go with a 0.003 or 0.006. You will not be able to tell a difference downrange. Now, the third most common mistake we see people making is disregarding or not paying attention to the back end of the arrow. And I'm not talking about your vanes, I'm talking about nocks. Improper knock fit can be detrimental to the accuracy of your arrow. If you have an arrow or a knock that's too tight on your arrow, that arrow shaft is going to want to hold on to the string a lot longer than if you had a proper knock fit, which could throw you off downrange. You'll see a lot of times when you have knock pinch, it's not because your D-loop is too tight, it's because the throat of the knock is too tight around the center serving of your shooting string. So when you draw back, you'll see this arrow actually start to lift off the rest as you come to full draw. That means you have a knock that is too tight. A knock that's too loose is going to want to do the opposite. It's going to want to fall off short. It's going to move around on the shooting string. It's going to throw your knocking point. It's going to throw the level off. So we've done a bunch of different testing with center servings, serving sizes. Knowing the serving size of your shooting string is pretty critical to getting the correct knock fit. So don't ignore that. Don't just say it is what it is, they fit how they fit. Pay attention to how your knock fits on the center serving to get the most accurate arrow possible. When you have the perfect fitting knock, I promise you, you will get more forgiving shots downrange, and that's what we need as bow hunters. The fourth mistake we see a lot of people making is not fully understanding your setup and buying things based off what's trendy. Super heavy, high FOC arrows are the trend for whitetail hunters. There's no doubt about that, and for good reason. But if you don't have the proper bow setup to shoot a heavy FOC arrow, you're gonna be hurting yourself. Just because so-and-so said you need to be shooting this type of arrow does not mean that that's gonna fly best out of your setup. For example, you have to know the give and take. With a super heavy arrow, you're gonna have a slow arrow. And when you have a slow arrow, you're gonna have big pin gaps. If you're shooting low poundage, if you're shooting short draw, that pin gap is going to lengthen. So you're going to really hurt yourself. Now, if you go the opposite, if you go super light, it's gonna be really fast, but it's gonna be lacking momentum. So you need to do some research. You need to understand what type of arrow shaft is gonna shoot best out of your bow. And that leads me into mistake number 4. And that is not leaving yourself enough time to get the proper arrow shaft for your setup. A lot of guys are buying their arrows in August, September, October even, to hunt in November or hunt in October. You're waiting too long. If you have an issue with your arrows, it's gonna take a couple weeks to get you a new arrow setup. So get them now, get them in July, shoot them a little bit, get to know them, and then you can tweak. If you're in between spines and you have a 350 spine and you need a 400 spine or you need a 300 spine, you have time to make that change. Because when you change spines, you're changing the weight of the arrow. You're gonna have to resight your bow, and there's a lot of things that change when you change an arrow shaft. So get them before it's too late. Shoot them a bunch, practice, practice, practice. You'll have more success in the fall when it really matters. Another really common mistake that we see a bunch of people making, and because it's 2022 and people are trendy, you're buying based on the arrow's looks, the cool factor. It has a sweet wrap on it, or it's a sweet color, or you have influencers telling you that this is the best arrow possible for you, but no one really knows exactly what's going to be best for you other than you. People shoot differently. People have different bow setups. My bow is different than Lucas's. It's different than Chad's. It's different than Jake's. We're all shooting a different arrow setup, and we are not the ones to tell you what's best for you. There's a few things your arrow absolutely needs to fly and kill a whitetail. It needs vanes, it needs a knock, and it needs something on the front end to screw your broadhead into and insert. If you look here at the Exodus MMT, there's nothing special looking about these arrows, but the performance, it is special. If you are buying your arrows based off of what looks the best, you could be hurting yourself on what flies the best, and that is what truly matters when purchasing arrows for your hunting setup.